The Choctaw Indians. The Choctaws believed that a person died because he lacked something in life. If a Choctaw man was dying, he was surrounded by his family and other tribe members and asked questions such as, "Did your wife not love you enough? Or do you not feel respected enough in the community?" Similarly, if a Choctaw woman were passing, she would be asked if she had not been a good enough wife to her husband. The Choctaws looked at the afterlife as either a reward or a punishment. If they were deemed to have led a good life, they would journey to the south side of the mountain that was full of sunshine and good hunting. If they were thought to have led a poor life, they were sent to the north side, which had lots of clouds and rain and very poor hunting. 3 reasons to be sent to the north side of the mountain upon death were tattling on neighbors, putting your pregnant wife away, or spilling innocent blood or causing it to be spilled. Another reason that you would be sent to the north side of the mountain is if you were shot. Choctaws sentenced to death must be hung, because if they were shot, it was believed they would be sent to the north side of the mountain. Early burial practices of the Choctaw was a scaffold burial. The body was taken from the house and put on a scaffold set up close to the house in the village, covered with an animal skin, and let the sun decompose the body. The body would stay there for months on end, either 2 months to 6 to 8, depending on the time of year and how quickly the body decomposed. During this time, family members would visit the body and wail 3 times a day as they sat at the base with their heads covered. The deceased were given their guns, food to eat, and anything else they were thought to need to make their final journey. If the deceased owned a dog, the dog was killed, as was their horse, so that they should have companionship and transportation to accompany them into the afterlife. Once the body had decomposed, ceremonial tribe members called bone pickers, who were designated to handle the deceased's body, would take the body down off of the scaffold. Bone pickers had distinct tattoos and long fingernails, which were used to pick the flesh from the bones. The majority of bone pickers were men, though there were a few instances of females found in records. The bone pickers would clean the bones of all the flesh and place the bones in a container to be taken to the charnel house. The flesh was collected and burned or buried. Once the bone pickers were finished with the bones and had taken them to the house, they presided over the feast without washing their hands. Each family had their own section in the charnel or bone house, so that relatives' bones were able to stay together. When the house was full, generally about a couple of times a year, they would collect all of the bones and bury them, creating a large mound. Some of these mounds still stand today. When the missionaries came in, the burial practices started changing. They, instead of being put on a scaffold, were buried immediately in a seated position. However, they were still buried with their possessions, men with their weapons, women with their jewelry and cookware, and children with their shoes, everything that they needed to continue on in the afterlife. Once they were buried, holes were driven into the ground around the grave and decorated with paint, hoops, and wreaths. Some people believe that the hoops were to help the dead ascend to the happy hunting grounds, while others just say that they were decoration. Mourners would still visit the grave 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, to wail and cry for the deceased. This would go on for several months. The bone pickers, no longer having their job as the bone pickers, now became the pole pullers. And when they came, It signaled the end of the mourning period and was again followed by a great feast. Today, the Choctaws have taken on more traditional customs. Burials are handled by funeral homes, similar to those that we're familiar with. Though there are still Choctaw prayers and mourning practices that go on. However, they last a day and then the feast is had. And that's the Choctaw.
Among the Hopi are different clans and villages, with beliefs and traditions varying from one Hopi clan and village to the next. Nonetheless, the Hopi as a whole believe that when someone dies, the body of the dead decays and that the soul escapes through the mouth, and the soul continues on existing into the world. Beliefs concerning children and adults varies. So when it comes to a child dying, and if this child has not been initiated into a religious society within their tribe, the child's body is placed into a crevice along the edge of the mesa, and there the body's buried there, and the soul of the baby waits on earth for their mother to give birth to another child, and that soul of the dead baby will enter into the body of the new baby. If there is no other child born, then the soul of the dead child, it remains on earth waiting for the mother to die in order to accompany the mother's soul. Where the body is buried, if there are remains of other children there from that family, then of course the family, they remove the stones, they bury the body there, replace the stones, and for each child that's buried there, they toss a stick within the crevices, and that tells them how many bodies are buried there. And then of course, as the remains rot away that have covered the body, the skull or the bones of the baby can often be seen within the crevices. And for the child that has not been initiated again into a religious society, they make a line on the earth pointing towards the child's home. That way the child's soul can find its way back to its parents. And they believe that the child's soul will hover over the house waiting. And if a mysterious noise is heard, they believe that the child's soul is moving around in the house, and therefore the mother is inclined to leave food on the floor in order for her deceased child to eat. When it comes to adults, when an adult dies, their body is prepared immediately for burial. They do not remove the clothes that they're wearing. Rather, the man's body and the clothes that he dies in is wrapped in buckskin. If buckskin is not available, they take his wife's white wedding dress and wrap his body with that. And then for a woman, her body is wrapped in her small wedding blanket, if not both her wedding dress and blanket, if the dress is still available. And then they wrap the bodies with a ton of other blankets, and then they tie it with ropes and carry it on the back of the father or a close relative to its final resting place. At the conclusion of the funeral, a prayer is recited telling the spirit of the deceased to not harm the living, but to instead to give blessings and to honor the living as the living honor the dead. Again, with adults, if they are a member of some religious fraternity within their tribe, their body is buried in a graveyard, which is usually on the slope of a mesa. The hole is dug 5 to 7 feet deep, and their body is placed in a sitting position facing towards the east. They fill the hole with dirt, sand, and rocks, and you will find that these burial places are scattered all throughout the mesa. They don't have a designated cemetery like we're used to. So if you're walking on a mesa and you see piles of rocks, it's probably because there's a body buried there. And because they have windstorms, sometimes, often the bones of the deceased will be exposed. Some of the basic beliefs and traditions of the Hopi are that death does not end a person's presence in the physical world. Rather, it marks a transition from one state of being to another. When a person dies, the Hopi believe that the person is born into another world, which is the world of spirits. The human force, I believe it's pronounced Hikwasi, but we refer to it as the soul. It is an invisible but tangible power. It's part of a physical, sensible world. It provides the body with thoughts, feelings, desires, intentions, and speech. So without the soul, the human body is just that, it's just the body. But with the soul, it's, a living, eating, breathing, active, open entity, able to communicate with the world. A big thing with preparing the body and burial is cotton. They place cotton over the deceased face. They call this a white cloud mask. It symbolizes the clouds that bring rain to the land. The Hopi believe that the souls of the dead, they're gradually transformed into clouds and mist. The souls become liquid, which is also known as rain, and this signifies the life and death cycle, because in order to live, people need to eat. In order to eat, they have to grow their crops. In order for the crops to grow, they need rain. And so this is why the living are constantly praying to the dead, and they're asking for rain to water their crops so they can eat. So it's just a constant cycle between the living and the dead. Lastly, when they usually have a 4-day ritual, and part of this ritual involves food. They place food near the body for the soul's journey. And let's see, one of the foods they make is piki, P-I-K-I. It's a thin wafer bread. It's prepared by the woman, usually the mother, the wife, or the closest relative of the deceased. And they place this food in a bowl on the ground. And then they place a string that points westward along with the meal line, and this denotes the continuation of the road to, life for the soul. And then on the 4th day, they believe that early in the morning, the soul of the deceased, it leaves the grave, and it partakes of the food that was left the night before. And after that, again, the soul, it goes, and according to that particular clan or tribe or village of the Hopi, it goes on existing, whether in another being or it becomes a cloud. And that right there concludes the traditions and beliefs of the Hopi. Thank you for your time.
My name is Chris, and I'm here to talk about the Navajo tribe. And I'm going to start off with a little background information, a couple facts. The Navajo are the largest Indian tribe in the U.S. In 2011, the census documented Navajo Nation to have around 300,000 people. The Navajo tribe originally began in the 1500s, and they eventually settled into a reservation on Fort Sumner, which is southeastern New Mexico, in the late 1800s. Navajo Nation lives on the largest reservation in the U.S., which covers 3 states on 17 million acres. These states include Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. Also, I want to point out that some tribes live in the corner of Colorado as well. They all live at the corner of all 4 that connected together. The Navajo are known for basket weaving. They create different baskets with a Navajo flavor. So all the baskets they make tie into their culture in some way. Their homes are known as hogans. They're made up of wooden sticks, mud, and tree bark. And for their clothing, they use sheep. Navajo were given the name Nahuka Divan Dene by the creators of the tribe, and it means holy earth people. Navajos today simply call themselves Dene, though, meaning the people. The Navajo Indians have 2 big kinds of ceremony. One is the blessing way, which keeps them on the path of wisdom and happiness, and the second major kind of ceremony is the enemy way. The enemy way is to discourage evil spirits and eliminate ghosts. The Navajo cultures have different festivities like the Navajo Festival, arts, and cultures, which brings everyone together to celebrate life. The festival supports what the Navajo call Hazo, living a happy and wise long life. So they all come together and celebrate, cherish the culture, be happy for that day. And as far as the Navajo music, the Navajo music sound comes from different instruments such as drums, rattles, and bull roars. And some range from ones about personal ritual, family setting, or ceremonies. So in their music, if at ceremonies or celebrations, they all gather in a circle and they go around the circle chanting words from their culture in unity. So it's pretty cool to look at. As far as their beliefs, they believe strongly in God. They call them the holy people. They believe that they do not praise these holy people. They will use their powers against them to bring evil to them. They're really big on that. So they're very cautious about death and believe in not talking about it to people much. Navajo traditional beliefs and practices are still carried forward by the youth today, not only through funeral rituals, but through dance, language, and other rites. As far as burial practices, burial practices vary depending on the deceased individual. Every individual is different. Burials are handled with caution and properly because they have a fear of the dead. As far as fear of the dead, every Navajo has a great fear of their dead. They believe that the spirit of the dead will return to the land of the living, especially when they are not properly buried. Their fear of the dead also make them believe that when someone dies, they go to the underworld. So they take certain precautions to make sure that the burial process is done correctly, because they don't want the person returning to return to the world of living. Also, Navajos are very reluctant to look at the dead body, so contact with the body is limited to only a few individuals. The Navajo choose 3 to 4 people to handle the death process, and they're the only ones that that deal with it, take the person to the burial site and that sort. So one of them is traditionally a relative or member of the same clan, and the other must be from the clan of the father, wife of the husband of the one who passed. They're the ones who prepare the body, bathe it, dress it in nice clothes. The men that are preparing the body do not wear any clothes during the process, only moccasins. So when they start the process, they smear ash all over their bodies. This ash is to be put on to protect them from evil spirits. They do not want the spirits to return to their home. So while they're doing that, 2 men dig the grave while the body is being prepared for burial. They have designated burial site for the dead, and after preparation of the body by the official people that handle the body, the body is immediately carried to the burial site. And as they carry it, they can only have sign language between the two, no talking. At the funeral is held as soon as possible. More than likely, it will be held the next day after the death. And going to the funeral, there's a horse that leads the body to the burial site, but the horse is typically killed shortly after. And they do this because they see it as an offering to the deceased person. They think that the dead person will take the horse with them in the afterlife. The deceased person's belongings are loaded onto a horse and brought to the gravesite, led by one of the 4 mourners. Two others carry the body on their shoulders to the area. The 4th man warns those he meets en route that they may want to stay away from the area. And once the body is taken care of, they ensure after that no footprints are left over, and then the tools that they use to dig up the grave, they all destroy it. And for the Christian burials, which they have established that the body is still prepared, dressed in nice clothes, and placed in a wooden casket. And there's also a minister that can be available at that time, and families and friends can gather up. These burial sites can either be found in or near Navajo land. As far as embalming, Navajo people still see the body as a blood vessel. That is when someone dies, the body is left alone. That is why when someone dies, the body is left alone. The body should not be embalmed, and the burial must be done as quick as possible after the funeral ceremony. Embalming is not allowed to the bodies at all. The reason for doing this is to ensure that the dead will never come back. I can't stress this enough, saying that the Navajo believe that if the person is not buried correctly, then the person's spirits will return to his or her former home. So as far as them choosing between hospital or home, the Navajo, because they believe the spirit would not linger in their house if they're passed away in the hospital. But if the individual does pass away at home, the remaining family members must burn the home, and then but while burning it, the members must stand in the firing house to purify themselves. As far as mourning after the death, typically you do not see much crying or loud expressions of grief when someone dies in the Navajo tribe. This is not because they don't care, it's because the Navajos believe that spirits' journey to the next world can be interrupted if too much emotion is shown. And that's my presentation on the Navajo tribe.
The Cherokee Death Rituals and Beliefs. Cherokee believes disease was believed to be the product of bad doings. Curing techniques were herbal medicines, ritual purifications, and enlistment of spirit helpers to drive out evil forces. Death. When a father was convinced he was about to die, he called his children together about him and gave them advice and instructions concerning their future life, repeated the ancient traditions, and reminded them about the Cherokee customs they should never forget. When death was arriving, only the priest and family stayed with the dying person. Females wept, commencing at the moment of death a lamentation in which they sang over and over the name of the deceased for as long as they could hold their breath. Male relatives put ashes on their heads and wrapped themselves in worn clothing. Formal mourning lasted 7 days. On the morning of the 6th and 7th day, the family went to the gravesite where the women wailed. On the 7th day, the family joined the community at the town council house for a meal. The community members offered their condolences to the family and engaged in the ceremonial dance. On the 5th morning, after the 5th day after death, family members gathered around the priest, and he took a bird that had been killed with an arrow, plucked off some of its feathers, and cut from the right side of the breast a small piece of meat. After praying, he put the meat on the fire. If it popped one or more times, throwing small pieces towards the family, sons of the family would soon die. If it did not pop at all, the sons were considered safe. Mourning continued for another 2 days. When the deceased was a husband, the widow was expected to remain single for a long time, and as for as much as 10 months, to let her hair hang loose and uncared for. She neither washed her body nor paid any attention to herself, or her clothes were thrown carelessly on. When her friends believed she had mourned enough, they went to her, combed her dress and her hair, and changed her garments. As far as the afterlife concerns, views differed according to what individual Cherokees believed about the powers who created and ruled the earth. Worshippers of the sun believed that at death the soul assumed different appearances, and at the first lingered at the place where the person had died for as long as the time as the person had lived there. Others believed that at death the soul entered the mystical but living body that was larger or smaller than its own. Whatever the case, the body the soul entered grew smaller each year until at last it vanished and ceased to be. This group also believed that adulterers and women who destroyed their infants would in some way after death be punished more than other persons. These Cherokees who prayed only to three divine beings above believed that all who were free from certain sins and vices at death would go to be with those beings and dwell with them forever in a place that would always be pleasant and light. But people with big sins would go to the place of bad spirits where they would scream in torment.
Who are the Sioux Indians? The Sioux Indians, whose origin is the continent of Asia, hence the long and straight jet black hair, came to America approximately 30,000 years ago. The name Sioux, which was given to them by the Chippewa Indians, means little snake. The Sioux Indians are divided into 3 language divisions: the Dakota, the Lakota, and the Nakota. There is no real difference among them other than the way that they pronounce their name. Overall, they all consider themselves part of the same culture, the Sioux culture. The original land of the Sioux Indians include present-day Wisconsin, Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Today, they mostly live in North and South Dakota, Minnesota, Nebraska, and Saskatchewan, and are referred to as the Great Sioux Nation. They are divided into 7 major tribes. Today, the 7 tribes are referred to as the 7 councils, and the close-knit tribe come together during the summertime to participate in ceremonies and share political concerns about their nation, special rituals, beliefs, and religious ceremonies. Wakantanka. The Wakantanka are those which made everything, the Great Spirit. The Dakota utilizes a system of spirituality that integrates all aspects and patterns of the universe. The center of the spirituality is the Wakantanka. Kanupa Wankan, which is the sacred pipe, carries sacred smoke and messages from the humans to the Wakantanka. The Sundance Ritual. The Sundance Ritual was the most practiced ritual of the Sioux and was considered the most religious ceremony. It involved fasting, singing, dancing, drumming, vision, and self-torture. It took place on the months of June and July when the moon was full. The Sioux Indians state exactly how the ritual was done. I quote, "The ceremony involved warriors being pierced through the chest or the back with a bone and having a buffalo skull attached with buffalo hide. The dancers would either be tethered to the tree that was chosen by the worthiest warrior, or they would dance with skulls dragging behind them. Each one of the young warriors presented himself to a holy or medicine man, who then took between his thumbs and forefinger a fold of the loose skin of the breast, and then ran a very narrow bladed or sharp knife through the skin, and then a skewer of bone was inserted. This was tied to a long skin rope fastened at its other extremity and to the top of the sun pole in the center of the arena. The object was for the warrior to break loose from these feathers. To be able to free himself, he must and had to tear the skewers through his skin, a task that even the most courageous required many hours of torture. The idea of the dance was to remove the buffalo skull and the bone from their bodies. The sun dance lasted for 4 to 8 days. It showed the balance of continuity between life and death. It showed that life never ended but was a cycle of symbolic deaths and rebirth. The Sioux believed that Mother Earth and all of its creatures were intertwined and dependent upon each other. The ritual involved sacrifice and was to ensure harmony between all living things. Today's ceremony still involves the tree singing and dancing. However, it is more about symbolism versus physical pain. The Ghost Dance. The Ghost Dance movement came about in 1888 due to severe starvation, suffering, and multiple deaths upon the reservations of the Sioux. The Ghost Dance was an effort to restore the lost relatives and the traditional way of life. The men and women and children who participated in the Ghost Dance, which were over 300, were murdered at Wounded Knee, South Dakota in 1986. Bigfoot band survivors and the descendants of those who passed away led the first memorial horseback ride, which was later known as the Instamnianpi Wisaglaga, which means to wipe the tears. In 1990, the 5th and final ride took place, identifying it as the 100th year anniversary of the massacre. Important chiefs of the Sioux tribe include Red Cloud, who was born in 1822 and died in 1909, Sitting Bull, who was born in 1831 and died in 1990. Sitting Bull was known as the holy man under the Lakota tribe. In 1874, when it was said that gold was in the Black Hills, General George Custer attempted to purchase this area. The attempt failed and prospectors began to rush the land and a treaty was thrown out. However, Sitting Bull and his people held their ground. Sitting Bull summoned the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Arapaho to his camp, and he led them in the Sundance ritual. During the ceremony, he had a vision, and a vision came to Sitting Bull. Sitting Bull vision included soldiers falling from the camp like grasshoppers falling from the sky, and this led him and Crazy Horse to set out for battle. He was shot by his own men, and his remains are buried in Mordred, South Dakota, where a granite shaft marked his grave. Crazy Horse, who was born around 1840 and died in 1877, is another important chief. He was determined to keep his land, culture, and tradition sacred. In the Battle of Little Bighorn, he fought next to Chief Sitting Bull and the Cheyenne Indians. Crazy Horse is known for being a fearless leader. He was the center of many battles. Crazy Horse has a memorial that is located in South Dakota in the Black Hills area. Life and death, spiritual beliefs of the Sioux Indians. The Sioux believe that people live through 4 generations: childhood, adolescence, maturity, and old age. When he or she dies, their one of 4 souls travel south along the Wanagi-Takanku, a spiritual path that's identified with the Milky Way. The soul then encounters an old woman who examines their character on earth. The old woman then leads the soul to the spiritual world, or they are sent back to earth where they are reborn and chosen to live another life in harmony. The Sioux Indians bury their dead. As I stated before, they believe in the interconnectedness of humans, animals, and nature. They view death as something that has to happen, and it is in their death that they enter a spiritual world where there is no more pain and suffering. When a loved one dies, they typically wait a day and a half in order to see if the deceased will awaken. The bodies of those who are not revived are dressed in fine clothes and are wrapped in robes. Sometimes the items of the deceased are buried in order to prevent others from using the name of the deceased person. Items such as weapons, tools, pipes, and medicines, and the horse's tail are taken to the grave and as a parallel plane of existence to help them on their journey into the spiritual world. Bodies are usually placed on the scaffold to encourage the journeys into the sky. Tree burials are often, and the branches of the trees are used as scaffold. This type of burials is often utilized for warriors. The ceremonies are meant to show respect to those who have passed. They may mourn and show grief for the departed by singing, cutting their hair, crying, yowling, and running pins through their limbs. In the event that a child dies, the adult may cry and wound their own arms and legs, and the mother may cut a small part of her finger off. Those are the Sioux.